Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is January 13th, 2021. President Trump's been impeached. Second time. First time a president has been impeached a second time. Pretty wild. It's been a really crazy past 7 days. We are not going to be focusing on American politics tonight, but had to start off the show with that.
Well, he did say we were going to get tired of all the winning, so he's won twice. So he's probably getting tired of it by now.
Right now, I feel like we won twice.
Yeah, it's too bad that it's coming so late in his term because if you get a third impeachment, they actually give you the fourth one for nothing.
Do you?
So yeah, it's really too bad that he's just going to miss out on the opportunity for impeachment 3 and 4 to happen like that.
You get a free sub at Subway kind of deal.
Well, let's not put it past him. There are still 6.5 days left. So who knows what's going to happen. Our regular panel tonight, as you have all just seen and heard, includes myself, John Lidke. We have Doug Sartori here, and we have Don Merrifield Jr. as well. It's a big show tonight. We've got a pre-record at the top of the hour that we're going to get to with Councillor Rino Bortolin. But first, we want to thank our Patreon subscribers. Again, Happy New Year. Thank you for sticking with us. We picked up a few. We really appreciate it. If you're not already a Patreon subscriber, make sure to head over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. We have not yet been deplatformed, so they're still taking your money to give it to us. So just make sure you go do that before, we pull a Trump and we get removed from all of our platforms. I don't think we're going to be calling for insurrection, though. We are broadcasting live on tape as we've been doing this past year now. It feels like. Thank you to the kind support of Leuna 625, building better communities. As I mentioned, we're going to be starting off the hour with a clip that Doug and I recorded with Councillor Rino Bortolin, Ward 3 councillor, and we talk about the Windsor-Essex Economic Development Corporation, WEEDC as they are known, and their spending of money on postcards that was celebrating local support for the new mega hospital location. We teased this last week, but we didn't have a chance to get to it, so we will be talking about that tonight. We also speak with the councillor about the DWBIA, the Downtown Business Improvement Association, their funding sources and their use of money for LPAT appeal, and how the mayor conflated taxpayer money with private money, and it's a whole thing. So we're going to get to that clip right now. We're not going to keep you waiting any longer. So Doug, if you want to hit the play button, we will all come back on the other side of it and give you our input as to what two of us just said and the councillor. Good evening. Welcome to Rose City Politics. John Lidke here with Doug Sartori. We are going to be doing a quick interview with Councillor Rino Bortolin, and we'll be jumping into our conversation with the panel about this topic after. Following a back and forth between Mayor Dilkens and Councillor Bortolin regarding both WEEDC and the DWBIA budgets and funding sources, and a broader discussion surrounding a WEEDC expenditure on holiday cards thanking supporters for mega hospital support, Rose City Politics reached out to WEEDC CEO Stephen McKenzie, Ward 3 City Councillor Rino Bortolin, and Mayor Dilkens to discuss this issue. Both Mayor Dilkens and WEEDC's CEO McKenzie did not respond to our requests whatsoever. Thankfully, though, Councillor Bortolin did, and we have him here now, which provides him the opportunity to let us know his thoughts about this issue. Councillor.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I think my comments were pretty direct and clear. And I think that, there's been a lot of muddling of what the issue is. Realistically, I think there are probably, there are three distinct issues here. One is a conversation about the, location of the hospital and trying to resurrect all that. I don't think my position needs to be explained on that. I think any listener out there knows quite clearly, especially if you watched the last council meeting where we addressed the hospital. I spent quite a long time articulating my exact position on that issue. It's not about that. The secondary issue could be a conversation about how effective this campaign was and how useful this campaign was to actually achieve its goals. Not that I'm even sure what the goals were of this campaign, but even that is a separate conversation, and maybe, you know, for you guys and the pundits to have that conversation with. But my concern as a publicly elected official is this is taxpayer money that was spent on this. And, you know, no, it wasn't $270,000 on the postcards, but it wasn't the $600 that Stephen McKenzie seems to think it cost either. The postage on 2,000 postcards alone would have been almost $2,000. So it's really about spending $270,000 on a cheerleading campaign for what? And so, and to what end? And this is our economic development corporation. How does this fit under the mission of Weedsea? How does this justify the spending of $270,000, especially in a pandemic year where we've seen businesses close? We're seeing businesses close their doors forever. We've seen businesses have to lay off staff. The impact on small businesses, especially in medium-sized businesses, has been huge. What could that $270,000 have done for the city's ailing small and medium-sized businesses? And instead, what we're looking at was a campaign that sent postcards, had some lawn signs, apparently some billboards. To do what? You know, we're supposed to be convincing our ministers and our premier and the provincial government that we need this hospital, that we deserve this hospital, which we do. So who are the postcards for? Who are the lawn signs for? Are we trying to convince ourselves? So there's a lot of questions around the campaign, and the efficacy of it, again, is another conversation. But flat out, this was a complete and total utter waste of money. And $270,000 of taxpayer dollars deserves to have a conversation about why and how this fits under the umbrella of Weedsea.
Absolutely. It was really interesting to see, you know, the cards be sent out. I would think that they would have realized the second that it was seen publicly that there would have been pushback on it. I find the conflation between printing of the cards, the price for that, and then, you know, omitting the postage, not to mention there's obviously design work. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and it does come down to just that use of taxpayer dollars. The mayor, though, made clear incorrectly that BIA money is taxpayer money, and it's obviously not. It's private money. So I want to hammer into that, hammer the funding sources between these two agencies, because the mayor looks like he's trying to deliberately mislead.
Well, his comments came after, you know, I had said in an AM 800 interview that, you know, maybe the $270,000 could have went to help getting businesses online. He made the point that that program exists. That program exists, ironically, because the BIA helped write a letter of support for the small business center that is affiliated with Weedsea to get a provincial grant to run this program. Weedsea dollars do not support the efforts by the mainstreet.org to get businesses online. That was a grant that they got. My point was, how much better could we have done if we added $270,000 to that pot? So, and I specifically mentioned businesses in the BIAs and how well the BIAs have pivoted and how the BIAs have been left to their own devices to use their own money to figure stuff out. And of course, the mayor came out with the comment that, well, they wasted $5,000 of their taxpayer money supporting the hospital LPAT appeal. He hasn't let go of that. He tried to bully and intimidate the BIAs and others at that time to not supporting that LPAT appeal. And he did make the erroneous statement and tried to confuse people and to say that it's taxpayer money. It is taxpayer money only by the definition that businesses are taxpayers and that they use their money to pay into this levy. So to clarify, BIA levies are collected by every business in this geographic area. So in the downtown area, on Erie Street, it's the geographic, you know, area of Erie Street, Ottawa Street. There are 9 BIAs in the city. Those BIAs have a board that set the budget. Once the budget is set, then they set the percentage of tax that needs to be collected for their levies. On many average sized businesses, that levy, if you own a restaurant downtown, for example, and it's just a simple building with a restaurant, you can probably expect to pay anywhere from $500 to $800 a year in BIA levies. The BIA budget, every BIA budget is 100% funded by the business and property owners themselves. Not one penny comes from the general taxpayer, not one penny comes from the city, not one penny comes from the province. Every single cent comes from the businesses themselves. So regardless of what you think, the relationship that the mayor mentioned was that just by the nature of what a BIA is, created by the province under the Municipal Act, and because we as a municipality are collecting those fees, we have to approve the expenditures. And really what that's there for is to make sure that the expenditures are not being completely mishandled and there isn't any corruption or things like that going on. We cannot walk into, or we should not walk into a BIA and say, we don't like the fact that you're spending on banners and you should put up lights instead. That's completely asinine. So getting involved and meddling in the BIA's business and overruling a decision of the board is a complete mistake. And when the mayor, along with part of city council, wanted to go after the BIAs for supporting the LPAT appeal, they were actually, basically they finally got good legal advice and found out that they didn't have a leg to stand on, so they backed off. And so the BIAs were allowed to fund the LPAT appeal, as that's advocacy for their own area. And so, I think what that whole exchange underlines isn't a matter, it's not about the details of the BIA. The BIAs and the BIAs that I've worked with, specifically the downtown BIA, this year have performed miracles. And what they've done with their budget and the amount of work and the amount of things that they've come up with this year has been amazing. And you know who hasn't been amazing this year? Weedsea. In fact, I see nothing that came out of Weedsea this year that supported any of the businesses that have been struggling all year long. I understand that their whole business case and business direction was challenged because of COVID, but many others had that same challenge. Look at Twepi. Twepi is a tourism agency tasked with attracting people here for tourist reasons. That had to be all thrown out the window. Their entire work plan for the year had to be thrown out the window. And you could argue about what things were effective or worthwhile, but you've seen Twepi everywhere, whether it be Takeout Tuesday, whether it be the pizza initiative, whether it be all these different things that they're doing with hotels and staycations and things like that. You've seen Twepi everywhere, and you've seen them step up. From a BIA perspective, every time they've asked Twepi for help, whether it be for the winter market and things like that, Twepi has come to the table and supported small businesses this year wherever they could. Weedsea has been MIA, and then a postcard comes to your mailbox. And this is what, and I think this is what triggered it. I was having a conversation with more than one business owner who have been struggling, clawing in their way with their nails, clinging to staying open a few days a week to be able to make enough money to pay the bills. And they received one of these postcards in the mail. It's a slap in the face to people who have been struggling all year to get this postcard that was sent by Weedsea promoting a hospital to its own citizens. I mean, come on. I mean, is this A, tone deaf, B, completely like misrepresenting and misunderstanding the needs of your own community, and just being completely MIA during a time when businesses and people needed the help the most. We saw Weedsea take a lot of heat from my previous colleague, Councillor Hilary Payne. He went after Sandra Pupatello. We weren't seeing numbers. We didn't see you come to council. Stephen McKenzie hasn't come and presented any numbers to us in as long as I can remember, since he started there. And yet here he is. And then when he came to council for the hospital, which I think was inappropriate to begin with. B, he sat down and suggested that this should be a unanimous vote, as if, since when do one of our own agencies come and do lobbying? And then C, couldn't answer the questions that I put forward to him to say, why is this an economic development issue? Why are you here supporting a location? It doesn't matter where the hospital goes, it will create the jobs, obviously. They're obviously going to need people to work on a hospital. So supporting the location has nothing to do with economic development. And then when asked about what kind of work that they've done to specify and to look into what the impact would be in the areas that would be displaced from the current hospitals, crickets. Nothing had been done. And even downplaying the fact that there wouldn't even be an impact there. So, I'm questioning the ability of the CEO to actually drive and guide our economic development in this region. And the $270,000 that was pissed down the drain for this useless campaign needs to be called out. So I look forward to when Stephen McKenzie comes to council to answer all these questions, because when I asked him during that hospital debate if he would come back, he said yes. And so I want to see what we got for $270,000. He seemed to intimate that we had 2,000 people, 2,000 supporters that were, gleaned from this exercise. And keep in mind that some of those supporters were anti this location, but had signed up and still received some of this and are still considered supporters in the database. So there's going to be a lot of questions, and I'm rambling now, but this is to me is an egregious waste of money. Is this millions and millions of dollars? No, but this is hundreds of thousands of dollars flaunted in front of everybody, and then there is no self-awareness either on the part of the mayor, the board, or the CEO of Wheatsea to say that we shouldn't have done this and we shouldn't have done it in this manner.
Well, I mean, an ROI of $125, $130 for 2,000 people to be identified from 270,000 that's ridiculous. Speaking about funding, last question, I'll be quick with this, and funding sources. It's 2021. We're talking about this hospital. The mayor says it's all done. We've seen letters to the editor that say everyone's on board 100%, even though we know that that's not the case. How well positioned do you think we are to be seeing a funding announcement from the province with, significant budgetary restrictions that exist right now everywhere? And did we use this past year to best position ourselves to try to get that money?
No, with the last question. We didn't do anything to position ourselves to get that money. We've done zero to actually get us forward. Trying to buy consensus is not the way you go about it. You don't buy consensus, you build consensus. And so we've done nothing to further the discussion about why this is a good hospital, good location, and everybody's on board. Whether or not we'll get the funding is actually, to me, a completely separate question. Any opposition to the hospital, camp, LPAT, naysayers, whatever you want, to me, personally, I don't think they have any bearing on this discussion. This is a political decision. This is a conservative government that has zero representation down here, with the hopes of maybe one seat, if any, in the next election. They're not going to spend $2 billion, and $2 billion was never the amount that the government ever agreed to. So you're not going to see that commitment. I mean, all you have to say is that if the premier, who has touted himself as the 800-pound gorilla so many times, has said that he's going to go into that room and he's going to push for it. Like, I hate to tell you this, but if the premier is on board, then you get what you want. So the reality is the premier is not on board, because the premier realizes that spending this money down here isn't good political capital for him. And so that's the issue. When it becomes an issue, when we have a candidate on the horizon of being elected down here, and it could be used as an election issue to potentially help get someone elected here, you may see it, and you may see the next announcement. But everything that we've seen has shown that that any of the funding is still 5, 6, 7 years off in the Ontario budget papers. So I don't actually think that this, everybody's in it together and everybody's holding hands saying we all love this location actually matters. This is a show. I don't know what kind of partisan games are being played. I see the mayor is much more into this government than any other previous government that he's worked with. I think that's a huge partisan aspect of this mayor and this mayor's office, but I don't see how we've come any closer to actually achieving our goal. And to be quite frank, I think that the politics behind it is more at play than any of the questions about location ever have been.
Okay. Well, Councillor, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, that was our interview with Councillor Bortolin. He really went a lot of places there. I love speaking with him because he is not known to hold back. Don, rather, we're going to go to you first. You weren't on the call and you just had to sit and listen to him for the past, 15 minutes. Is it any different for you to have to just sit and listen to him in a video format and not be able to question him?
Not really, because when I talk to Reno, I tend to just tone him out anyway. So it doesn't really make any difference. I get, first of all, this whole thing with the Economic Development Commission and this PR campaign for the hospital is, I think Reno said it right, and it's not often Reno and I agree on things, but yeah, it was just a ridiculous waste of money. Why we're trying to convince people in Windsor that they should support a hospital that they have no say over when, if it's going to be built doesn't make any sense to me. We should be sending postcards to the premier and to the Minister of Health saying we need this hospital desperately. And if we've learned anything from the whole pandemic situation, we need some kind of new hospital facilities in this area. We've needed them for decades. We've been ignored for a long time. And I think what the councillor said, as far as the partisan politic thing, is pretty relevant. I mean, in a perfect world, the idealist in me would say, the government would make decisions based off a need. But obviously that's not the case. Politics plays into this. For a long time, we've been NDP supporters down here and they've never been in government. And I don't think that's helped us in a lot of ways. So, in a perfect world, none of this should matter. They should be building the hospital because we need it. But on the municipal politics scene, this whole topic is ridiculous because the Economic Development Commission shouldn't be wasting taxpayers' money on a PR campaign for something that is completely outside their boathouse. And anybody who supports it, including the mayor, is just, I think what Reno said is correct, playing politics because it's all irrelevant. None of this matters to the people up in Toronto. This is all just playing partisan politics down here.
Doug, what's your take on it? You were on the call.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I want to say that it's really impressive to me that Councillor Bortolin now has the self-awareness 6 years into his time as a elected official to say, hey, I'm rambling. That's that I think is a remarkable level of self-awareness by a politician. Having said that, and jokes aside, I think the two things that stick out to me here are number one, the efficacy of this campaign. By what measure has this been a successful campaign? Councillor Bortolin alluded to it. If that number is accurate, 2,000 names, not only, as you pointed out on the call, is that remarkably poor performance in terms of dollars invested to actual supporters identified, but also it represents a significant reversal or a significantly lower number than have been achieved by similar efforts in the past in this community. I think of 42 Forward, which was a grassroots effort associated with a petition to try to move forward and specifically focused on the County Road 42 location. Last time I checked, they had well over 4,000 signatures on that petition. So considering the glitz and the money spent and the pushing, I don't think that in the summer especially, you could not scroll Facebook in this town without seeing a "We Can't Wait" ad. considering the level of investment that was made, performance on this thing has been really, really poor, and that is one thing I think that we need to identify. The other thing, and this is one that I've been thinking a lot about, is the missed opportunities. And Councillor Bortolin, I think, alluded to that really well, but I want to make it concrete. There are two programs that I can think of that We'd See got engaged in and then went away from. The first one was, I don't know if you folks can remember this, but back in the early days of the pandemic, there was actually an emergency response committee that was convened by We'd See. They convened a committee. I don't recall what the name of it was, to actually coordinate the economic aspects of pandemic response. At some point in the summer, that fell by the wayside. I'm not sure why, but it seems to me that would be a better use of We'd See resources, time, and money than the We Can't Wait campaign. The other one, and this is one that really bugs me because it hits on a hobby horse of mine. You may remember back in the summer, Stephen McKenzie was in the media talking about a new program that We'd See was launching, and that program was focused on attracting remote workers, people who have jobs that can be done from anywhere, to this city. When that happened, I was so excited because that is an absolute opportunity for this community. I could spend 10-15 minutes explaining to you all the reasons that I think that would be a huge benefit to us as a community, to have more people whose jobs are elsewhere, and the income that comes with it in this town. They actually promised a campaign, 12 videos, if I remember the media articles correctly, a campaign focused around attracting people who either came from Windsor or live elsewhere in this country, and particularly in Ontario, and might consider relocating to Windsor. A way better use of resources than We Can't Wait. I would love to know why those programs not just weren't started or weren't thought of, because we could dream up all kinds of things that maybe they shoulda, coulda, woulda done. These are two concrete examples of programs that We'd See decided weren't worth their time to pursue over the course of this year, that would have had a much higher material benefit to this community than this failed AstroTurf campaign.
Yeah, you put it really well. It it's disheartening. I've talked about this before a lot, but it's the same as the public consultations that we see in the city. Just the trying to just tick off the check boxes on the piece of paper to get to the level of engagement that's required to be able to say we've actually done something when it wasn't done. And that's exactly what this campaign is. And it is a ongoing thing that we've seen. It's a complete waste of money. And I think it'll be really interesting to see CEO McKenzie defend it, or at least attempt to, or maybe not. Maybe there is no attempt to.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I'm also going to be really interested to see how the media angle of this plays out, because if you remember the Sandra Pupatello incident, that period of time in her final days at We'd See, it wasn't just Councillor Payne. There was a huge media push as well. There seemed to be a fair bit of glee in local media pushing that story. So it'll be really interesting to see how local media pursues this story. I realize that Stephen McKenzie is not a household name and probably doesn't drive the kind of clicks or sell newspapers the way that Sandra Pupatello would. But it'll be really interesting to see exactly how this goes. But I think the first hurdle is going to be, will Stephen McKenzie actually appear before council? So for those who didn't watch the council meeting that Councillor Bortolin alluded to in his interview, that was brought up. Councillor Bortolin asked Stephen McKenzie if he would come to council and talk about this program, as well, presumably, as the overall performance of the Economic Development Corporation. And Stephen McKenzie said absolutely yes. And Mayor Dilkins cut in to say that would be a board decision. Now, which I thought was really interesting, considering that Mayor Dilkins is on the board of Weedsy. So it'll be really interesting to see whether or not that actual that invitation actually turns into an appearance at council.
Well, it's interesting because, when that whole thing went down with Sandra and Councillor Payne at the time, like you said, there were a lot on council, and especially in the media and even some public uproar that, these organizations should be reporting their effectiveness and what they're doing to city council because they are taxpayer funded. And maybe naively, even I'm a little shocked to see that that hasn't been the case going forward since then, because it seemed like a lot of people who were city councilors, the mayor included, were saying, yeah, this is the way it should be. We should be getting these reports. And nothing has happened on that front going forward. And sadly, for us, it was interesting having John say, we've talked about this before. That's the problem. We've talked about all this stuff before. Every time we do this show, we've talked about this stuff before, and nothing seems to change. And even when, a story happens like the Sandra one, it still doesn't make any changes happen. They're still doing things the same way they did. It's like a problem arises, they throw out some nice words and it goes away, and then, nothing really changes. And, one other thing, I think the fact that Reno called Doug Ford an 800-pound gorilla is kind of interesting to me too.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on that, Don. I don't want to touch on the 800-pound
Do
gorilla
the gorilla
stuff.
part. That's the best part.
But I don't follow media in other Canadian cities all that closely, so it's hard for me to say for sure. But my impression is that our Economic Development Corporation is a lot more prominent in our community in terms of being part of the discourse and part of the political discussion than it is elsewhere. That's just my impression. And I think that politicization of the Economic Development Corporation doesn't do them any good. I don't think it actually helps them pursue their mission, and I don't think it moves this community forward. To me, this all started because economic diversification has been something that has been promised going back to the days of Mayor Francis, ever since really the recession in the mid 2000s hit, and Windsor was very concerned about its future for good reasons. And I think that part of Mayor Francis's push towards economic diversification was making Weedsy front and center. And we got to remember that Sandra Pupatello hire came in the Francis era. So, at some point, she was useful. Sandra Pupatello was useful as an indicator of how serious the city was about economic diversification. And then ultimately, she served the role of being the whipping person, being the person who takes the blame for a lack of economic diversification. It's not surprising to me at all that there hasn't been regular reporting of numbers from Weedsy, because as far as I can tell, none of what we see in the media and none of what we see from politicians on the Economic Development Corporation is really about their performance and really even about what they should be doing or how we should be measuring them. It's all sizzle. And I think what's happened is that a perfectly good community organization with lots of really smart and hardworking professionals working at it has been turned into a political sideshow to nobody's benefit.
Strong words, but
Oh, it's true. I mean,
well, it's unfortunate that Weedsy CEO wasn't willing to come on to speak about this issue, let alone any of the other ones that are around it. And what does that say about a publicly funded organization not to even respond? I mean, they don't have transparency. They're not looking to have that transparency. I'm not saying that we deserve everyone to respond to this podcast, but you look to how they treat council, not coming forward with reports. And I think it speaks to, obviously, leadership style. It's set from the top. It's been a continuing thing. And taxpayers need to start asking, like, what's the use of this? I think you put it really well there, Doug, saying it's a political sideshow, and to whose end. And I've yet to see any benefit to anybody.
Well, we're seeing municipalities in Windsor, Essex, starting to open their own economic development offices and hiring economic development officers. I believe the city of Windsor, for a period of time, I don't know if they still do, had their own economic development officer. The town of Lakeshore recently hired an economic development officer. I don't know enough about the details of what they're doing day to day, but if the Regional Economic Development Corporation was delivering, why would municipalities double up on those services?
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. Why would you do that?
Obviously, they feel that there's a more direct need. I mean, we were speaking about this a bit as well before the show, Doug. The Economic Development Corporation's absolute running away from the cannabis sector, midstream, having some things on their website for a little while, then to removing and purging everything and simply saying no comment when it's the fastest growing sector in a number of our cities and towns throughout the region here. I mean, it's asinine and it's obscene to run away from something that has already generated so much, created so many jobs, has the potential to create more if there was a comprehensive strategy. I mean, I think there's definitely funding at the federal level for, innovation clusters, and if there was a group that was, purportedly supposed to represent the region and economic development, that would be something that they should be jumping in front of and pulling everyone towards. But instead, no comment really makes things difficult.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
well, I was just going to say that seems to be part of the politicalization of that organization, because we all know the mayor has, made nothing but disparaging comments about the cannabis industry and, trying to take advantage of it down here, including the health unit was, we're making mandates about how far it had to be from, schools and things like that. So basically every time someone tries to open up any cannabis related business, especially in downtown Windsor, it's like getting punched from 5 different directions to try to sort that out. And that I think is politics. And even going back to what I was saying before, I mean, they're not making, or maybe what Doug was saying, they still haven't come in front of council, but that's, again, the mayor sits on this board. If he really wanted disclosure and to show how effective this organization is being, he'd be more than happy to say, hey, come quarterly and give a report, and we can, even use this information about what a fantastic job we're doing. And, his response at the time when it was brought up, well, we can't make arbitrary decisions like that. That's a board decision. That just shows to me that even he's not proud of the work they're doing, because if he was, we all know our mayor, he would use this politically to his advantage, and he's not doing that. And that probably says more than anything.
Yeah, so bringing it back to the We Can't Wait campaign, there's a piece of information that is publicly available that I think people ought to know about. And you can verify this yourself if you go and take a look at the We Can't Wait Facebook page. One of the things that Facebook does is disclose the amount of money that pages spend on ads about social issues, elections, or politics. And from
If there
June,
was one positive thing about the breakdown of democracies amongst the
yeah,
Western world over the past 4 years, we can now see how people are spending their money.
right. Well, yeah. At least we get to see these numbers. Right. Thank you, Russian trolls, for doing severe damage to American democracy, because now I can pull this number out on this show, and it's all about Rose City politics. So there you go. The total spent on ads by the We Can't Wait page from June to January 2021, so June 2019 to January 2021, was $18,113. They spent almost 20 grand on Facebook ads. And that has continued. I think that they are I'm still seeing ads in my Facebook feed. So this is still happening. That is a staggering amount of money for a local Facebook ad campaign. That is a huge amount of money. It guarantees you pretty much saturation coverage in between the the Wish ads for the weird random stuff, and all of the ads that are targeted specifically to my age demographic, things about hair loss and erectile dysfunction and so forth. You also, the
I feel
other
like I'm being personally attacked over here at this point in the show.
the other thing that dominates my feed is these damn we can't wait ads. These guys have paid an immense amount of money to advertise to the community, and the response that they have gotten has been pretty darn anemic. 2,000 supporters.
It blows me away. I'm just crunching numbers right now. $18,113 over a period of 25 weeks is $724 a week. And I'm just trying to think back to like if at higher limits when we would advertise shows trying to sell out a place for 450 to 500 people, we would maybe drop between $300 to $600 over a 3 to 4 week period. And this is $725 a week. And like, what's the ROI here? And this is only, 20 grand of a $270,000 spend. So, but I like that we're able to focus in right here because it helps to make it really applicable, because I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening right now, you've bought Facebook ads yourself. You know that for a relatively small amount of money, you can reach a large amount of people. I guess the question being, do you think anyone who has seen the ad more than 26 times in a 2 to 3 month period is going to be any more convinced to, oh, you know what? I'm over it. I used to be a camp supporter, but no, we can't wait. You're right. You got me. We can't wait.
Yeah, so I actually think the campaign, and I want to be fair to Crestview Strategies, I actually think the campaign itself, in terms of its approach and its content, has been decent. Very professionally done, attractive graphics. They have apparently used those resources well, but at the end of the day, you can't polish a turd. You cannot sell people something that they have no interest in buying. And this reinforces the impression that I've had for a long time. The biggest negative for this whole thing, the biggest downside for the proponents of the hospital, especially at this location, is that the never-ending toxic nature of this debate, I think, has made the guy on Askin Avenue tune out completely. I just think people are not interested in this issue. I think most people would rather not take a side or rather not wade in on this issue. There are the extremely dedicated and motivated people on either side, and there's a fair population on either side who will populate the comment section and go to war anytime an article related to this proposal is posted. Beyond that, what is the evidence that there is a high level of interest in the community? And I have to put that on two things. One, I think the length of time that this has been going on. This is now going back, 7 years, 6 years. This saga has gone on for an awfully long time. There has been no appreciable movement, so there's nothing really new to say or talk about. We're having the same conversation over and over again. So the extremely slow pace of developments on it, I think, is one factor, and the other factor is the debate is toxic. It's nasty. It's ugly, and the people who are responsible for making this into a toxic, nasty, ugly debate are the reason why the public has tuned out, and the reason why there isn't more support for this initiative or a broader debate in the community, my opinion.
Well, John had said with the campaign, like, what's the ROI, which is return on investment for people who don't know. What is the return they're looking for? I mean, you could convince me that the location's good or bad. It doesn't make any difference to the Minister of Health and the people doling out the money in Toronto. They're not, this is a local argument we're having about a proposal and project that at the end of the day, we don't control. It's about another level of government saying, yes, we agree to it. It seems, your plans are fine. Where we put it probably doesn't make any difference to the people in Toronto that much. So I understand why we're having the fight politically, because it was started and then people's feelings got hurt, people in power. So they decided to, act like 2-year-olds and start buying Facebook ads for each other. There is no return on this investment. The investment is being made over a local political animosity between two groups, being the hospital people and mainly the camp people. And whoever wins that argument doesn't make any difference on the actual project. I mean, it's not going to change anything. Either we're getting it or we're not getting it. And to sit around and argue about, people's feelings being hurt and using taxpayers' money to have that fight is a complete waste of money. There's no return on the eye.
Yeah, and I want to just pick up on that point, Don, because the provincial government has recognized that we need renewal in healthcare in Windsor, Essex. There will be a new hospital built here eventually. And whatever location is selected, there will be an investment. And I think that there is some really good questions to be asked about what the true cause of the delays is and what is the real reason this has taken so long. Back in 2014, 2015, when this was a new topic of discussion, nobody envisioned that they would still be in phase one in 2021. There have to be reasons that this project hasn't moved forward. I don't accept the reasons that have been presented. I also think that part of this, maybe part of the return on investment is political, Don, and maybe it's about scapegoating. Maybe a big part of this campaign and what's important about this campaign is making sure that the quote unquote right people take the blame if things fall through. And the right people in this instance being anybody but anybody who had actual power or influence over the decision.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I lived in Toronto for a decade. The whole 90s, I lived in Toronto. And one thing I learned really quick about living up there is nobody talks about Windsor and Toronto. It's not on the news. Politicians don't talk about it. You never hear about it. There's the old saying, Ontario ends at London. In some way, that's true. It's probably a little better now, just because media has changed so dramatically. You can't convince me that there's nobody in power making the decision on the hospital who is saying, well, let's wait and see if the camp organization wins or if the We Can't Wait organization wins, and then we'll base our decision off of that. None of that to me makes any sense. This is a local political fight. Some politicians and maybe some private sector people had their feelings hurt because somebody said bad things about each other. And this is just ballooned into almost ridiculousness to where we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars arguing with each other that has, again, like I said, there's no R on the ROI. It's just people bitching at each other and politicians, like you say, trying to make sure if this all goes to hell in a handbasket, they can say, well, it wasn't me, it was those guys over there who've been fighting it for 5 or 10 years.
I see it like as a recognition that, Windsor, we're at the end of the 401. Everyone forgets about us. And the only way that we could even get funding that we are deserving of, we have to overwhelmingly show that there are no divisions whatsoever, because the second that we show a crack amongst us, then, it's just that inferiority complex. We think that we won't be able to get anything. But, this is an issue. It's you said, Doug, like it's dividing the city. It's dividing people against each other. It's not there's no resolution that's in sight, even with the hospital eventually getting built. And it's a tough one, but we've talked about this before. Let's not get lost into this pit about falling into the merits or not merits about the hospital. We'll get on to the last issue of the night. We're talking about anonymous sources in Windsor media, specifically in the context of undermining our local health unit. Following a series of anonymous sources that were used in Windsor Star articles by columnist and occasional reporter Ann Jarvis over the past, 6 to 7 months now, really towards the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we here at the Rose City Politics panel wanted to discuss this issue a bit more in depth, sort of how did we get here, but also we wanted to have a broader conversation about the use of anonymous sources in the city throughout media as well. In this case, it's been a repeated theme where we've seen anonymous sources who have almost certainly pointed to specific communications, maybe to request through freedom of information requests or themes to search for. We've seen the use of anonymous sources deployed as a means of certainly attacking the health unit. Maybe saying undermining earlier was a bit too strong of a term. I'm not looking to get a letter myself here. Just have a conversation, of course. But
you just called Ann Jarvis an occasional journalist. Is she like a plumber at other times, or
no,
what is
she's an occasional reporter. She's a columnist at the Windsor Star, and occasionally she gets these. You know, screw you, Don. It's a serious issue. Switching between columnist to journalist is it's a thing.
I need a title.
That's right. I need a roughin in my basement for a new bathroom. Should I call Ann? Is she the one who's gonna?
Screw off, Don. We wanted to talk about, though, you know, what are our thoughts about the use of anonymous sources in local media? I'll start off right now. I think there's a big role for it. If you're a whistleblower, if you are someone who's coming forward with something that's incredibly newsworthy, that is raised to the level of not only sparking public interest, that's very easy to achieve, but you have something that is necessary for the public to know, to have a better understanding of how their community is operating, how their leaders are operating, how interagency conflicts may exist. Like there is definitely roles for anonymous sources. My concern with this situation here is that it seems like these are anonymous sources that are being used to settle personal vendettas or political agendas, and that is a little bit concerning to me personally. Doug, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I tend to broadly agree. Anonymous sources are important. It is important to be able to get factual information onto the record, and it's not always desirable or possible for people to put their name to it. That I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything sinister about it. It is what it is. But you're also counting on the discretion and judgment of the reporter. And you're trusting them. So to the extent that you're going to put faith in those sources that aren't given attribution in the piece, it's because of the faith that you have in the journalist. So that, I think, is the biggest concern here. Is actually the biggest concern that I think I see is that it's actually not particularly good for the Windsor Star or for Ann Jarvis. This is the second time that we've seen a pretty questionable use of anonymous sources in the pages of the Windsor Star. Brian Cross, with the now infamous piece, giving someone a platform, some anonymous person, presumably close to the mayor, a platform to spew invective about MP Eric Kazmarczyk. That was a really unfortunate, in my opinion, a really unfortunate way to go. And now we have this same thing happening again, where we have anonymous people providing, yes, there is some information, but there's also a heck of a lot of opinion there. And, to me, I don't see what there was what the need was to protect that source in order to get factual information out there that justifies its use in this piece. Look, I'm not a journalist. I don't have that professional training, so I don't know the ins and outs of when and why, but I do know that professional journalists, some of whom used to work at the Windsor Star, have made some comments about this, and have similarly expressed views about the way that anonymous sources are being used. Marty Beneteau, who was the former, I believe, publisher of the Windsor Star, took to Twitter specifically to make comments about the anonymous sourcing in the Brian Cross piece. So it's not just us weirdos here at RCP who have some concerns about this. I think it goes a little bit broader than that. And to your second or to your other point about the undermining of the health unit, I don't really understand what public service is being done, especially when we see that that piece was like way overblown. Jarvis was misled or led down a path to producing that column or that piece that didn't pan out. It was only days after that piece hit the newspaper that it turns out that the health unit actually had completed vaccinating all the long-term care homes in the community. And it looked like Dr. Ahmed's pretty passionate comments about what was happening and what leadership is. And I was really actually quite impressed with his comments at his press conference. It looks like those comments were right on and coming from the absolute right place. So not only do we have anonymous sources being used in a way that some people would question, but then we also have the fabric and the total point and perspective of that piece being undermined by facts only days later. So what are we left with?
Well, and not only was it undermined just within days, and we'll come to you, Don, just really quick. I just wanted to add this context. Windsor-Essex became the first region in the province to complete all of our long-term care residents and staff, save for a few who weren't able to be caught on the first swipe through, but have since been vaccinated. We did that 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks before the province's deadline. And I'll let you know, I put up a tweet about this. It was one of my most viral tweets. It went across the whole province with like 500 likes and 200 retweets. And I'm not giving myself any accolades here, only to the fact that there was so much good news out of that people across the province were just going, kudos Windsor-Essex. That's some really great news. So it's so surprising to see something that was such a dark and gloomy situation turn into the good news story of, quite frankly, the past couple months. I've never seen such a 180 on something. Don, let's come to you though.
Well, I think if we look back to, I'm going to guess here, so I could be wrong, maybe April, May, there was a lot of tension between the health unit, Windsor Regional Hospital, and the other people in power about testing. They were complaining about testing long-term care residents, and how, I believe, there was even emails released. There was a newspaper article about, the communications going back and forth between Mr. Muji and Dr. Ahmed. So this has been, and look, I'm equally going to be critical of every political organization because that's just the way I am. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Windsor-Essex County Health Unit has been perfect and nailed it. And I'm not going to sit here and say the Windsor Regional Hospital has been perfect and nailed it. And there's enough blame to go around for every level of government and organization about how the vaccine rollout is happening. So to me, anyone who read the Ann Jarvis piece, fabulous plumber, by the way, from what I hear, she, you can almost, it's, I don't know, but it seems pretty obvious who the anonymous sources were, given the tone and the whole kind of story behind the article and about what they were complaining about. So, going back to the media aspect of it, anonymous sources are very important. I got in a little Twitter fight with Rino because Rino had made Councillor Bortolin had made a comment that, maybe she should reveal her sources. No politician should ever tell a journalist of any sort they should reveal their sources, unless you're Richard Nixon or McCarthy. But, it seemed to be, I guess, what bothers people, and even me, I don't want to sit here and criticize Ann. Ann's a fabulous journalist. She's been doing a lot of great work in this city for a long time. And we've had many show discussions where we know that the funding of media in this area has dwindled to almost nothing. And they're basically working off their own pencil all the time. So any work they're doing is good considering how poorly funded they are. This just seemed like, for some reason, she got involved in a political fight and wanted to participate by framing it the way she did and presenting it the way she did. I don't think that was right. But at the end of the day, if we're going to, this is a serious thing going on. We sit here and argue about politics all the time, but there's people dying. 11 people died yesterday from the pandemic. If somebody in power who has some actual, control over how this pandemic response is being handled has a problem with the Windsor-Essex County Health Unit, they should do so on the record publicly and say, hey, our organization doesn't think your organization is doing something right. This is why. How do we fix this? instead of doing it this kind of Windsor way of, well, let's just hide in the background and take shots at people and then, sit in the shadows and wait to see what the response is. Again, I'm not going to pick on Ann. Ann does fabulous work. I really like Ann Jarvis. I think she's one of our better reporters and journalists in this city. But this to me wasn't done properly. But at the end of the day, anonymous sources are the bread and butter of even on, a little show like ours. We've had people say, hey, look into this too. And, don't use my name. So, it's an unfortunate situation that we're arguing about politics during a pandemic when people are dying. The organizations handling this should be out front, public. If they have a problem with someone else, how they're doing it, if they can't handle it in private, I don't think doing an anonymous source newspaper article is going to solve any problems. If anything, we've been talking about this for a week now. It's just a distraction over what the real work they have to do.
Well, we will leave it there. I got to agree with you on most parts, Don. And I guess, just to end it on this, I don't think the anonymous sources are going away. You need to be anonymous to make those swipes. It's a small city and there's only so many parties, and, the same people see each other at the mall. So you really can't take that risk of being.
We never get invited to the cool parties, and this is why, John.
Right?
This is
See?
why.
Yeah,
We should all these comments should be made anonymously, and
100%.
then we would still be invited.
Why can't Don drink 43-year-old whiskey at Nico's and break pandemic protocols?
Well, my understanding is that's because there's a lifetime ban at Nico's for you. It's got nothing to do with what the mayor
Look,
thinks.
I didn't know you have to wear pants at every restaurant. Jesus.
There's so many regulations now.
Rules
Jeez.
and rules. Just let me live my life.
Well, thank you for listening to Rose City Politics. We kept this one to an hour on the dot. Feeling really proud about that one. We weren't even keeping a timer, really. Thank you so much to our Patreon subscribers. If you're not, head over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. And as always, thank you so much to Leuna625. Building better communities. Your kind support is always appreciated. We will all see you next week